Hi, I'm Neil Thomas. This is a real estate short take. We'll call it, How Do I Buy a Foreclosure? You know, I hear this question all the time, and it's probably because I'm known as a person with a lot of experience in marketing foreclosed properties. I go back to the real estate crash in 1985 when I did a lot of this sort of thing. And so I've been representing lending institutions as well as the people who buy these kinds of properties, for a long time. At any rate, the question, how do I buy a foreclosure, sort of, in a way, isn't the right question. But let's be clear first on terms. A foreclosure is a property that the bank already owns. Now, this isn't to be confused with a short sale. In these real estate short take lessons on this website, you can watch the one about short sales and see how they work. But this is one where the bank's process of basically repossessing the property has been completed. So the bank owns the property, and there's no debt against it. It's their loan, and they're now remarketing the property to the general public. The procedures they follow are sometimes sort of cumbersome. They're a little different from the norm. Any of us who do this sort of thing all the time know how it's done, and we can guide you about that part, and I won't take your time with it here. Let's look at big principles instead. The bank owns the property, and their goal is to sell it for what it's worth. Now, one thing to know about the Alaska market is that this is one of the lowest foreclosure rates in the nation here, and so at least at this point in the spring of 2011, there's not that many foreclosures out there to begin with. That's important to realize, because if you limit your search to bank foreclosures, you're really kind of missing the major part of the market. My suggestion is this: be more concerned for the suitability of the property. How well does any particular property meet your needs? And keep the search, at least initially, as broad as you can, to look for as many properties that might be suitable as you're able to. Give yourself full exposure in the marketplace, and don't limit your choices. After all, when you think about it, what do you care who owns the property? I think the reason people focus on foreclosures is that they think foreclosures represent a good deal. And in a sense, many do. At least they're cheap, and that's sort of what gets people's attention to begin with. But there's a reason for that. You know, I said a minute ago that the bank's goal is to sell a property for what it's worth. And it's common that foreclosed properties have had hard use. After all, the people couldn't do what they needed to do to maintain the property and maintain house payments, and so they lost it. So many times foreclosed properties are in disrepair, and their value reflects the condition. So it's not that a foreclosed property is inherently priced less than a comparable property would be. It's just that bank properties often stand out from the norm by not being in very good condition, and that's why they're priced low. One issue you frequently encounter with bank foreclosed properties is that many are in such poor condition that you can't get financing for them. Your new lending institution doesn't want to take on a property that's got serious code violations, health violations like mold, life safety violations, decks that are going to fall off and that sort of thing. So every lender who you might work with to get a loan for your purchase has certain minimum property standards, and they're going to learn about the condition of the property through any inspection reports that you might give them, and more particularly through the eyes of their appraisal. The bank does the appraisal, and in part it's to learn whether the property is in condition sufficient that they're willing to finance it. So you have this property that may not qualify for financing at all, and typically you'll run into this if you see a property that seems to be priced between half and 3/4 of what you think it normally would be. And you get all excited and say, oh boy, what a bargain. But there's a rule of thumb about these kinds of properties. If a property, and this is true of any property, not just bank-owned properties, but it's more common to encounter it with bank-owned properties. If a property is in such poor condition that you can't get financing for it, it seems to be true, at least in the Anchorage market, that it will sell for about 3/4 to maybe 60% of what it would otherwise sell for if it was in acceptable and in good condition. So for instance, a $200,000 house, if it's really beat up and run down and has serious problems, it's going to sell between $120,000, maybe $140,000. And if you can pay cash, and by that I mean not getting a loan, I mean you write a check for that amount or draw from other funds, borrowing against other properties, for instance, borrowing against retirement accounts, wherever you would come up with that much cash, that's how you acquire the property. There's an interesting rule about buying a foreclosure for cash. People think that it ought to be possible to buy these things really cheap, fix them up, and make money at it, and indeed people do. But it's done more often by people who are in the business, who are used to doing this kind of thing, and more particularly people that have large amounts of cash available and the skill and ability to make repairs inexpensively. There's a rule that seems to go like this with this sort of property. Let's take this $200,000 property that in theory perhaps you could buy it for $120,000 because you have to write a check for it. It seems like the remaining difference between the two is broken in thirds. About 1/3 of that gap typically goes for your out-of-pocket costs of making the repairs. Replacing doors, replacing carpet, doing everything that has to be done to bring the property up to marketable standards. Another 1/3 is what you should sort of allocate to yourself as your salary, your payment to yourself for your time and effort in coordinating this project. And then the final 1/3 should be profit. So if you can take a property like this and perhaps buy it, maybe let's use $125,000 because it's a little easier to do that sort of math, and you put $25,000 of materials into it, you figure your time was worth $25,000, you can eventually make this into a $200,000 property, and in effect you built $25,000 of equity. That's sort of how that works. Short of that, if you're more likely to be the kind of person who isn't in the business of that kind of project and you're just looking to buy a foreclosure, I would strongly recommend that you consider foreclosures alongside everything else so you don't limit your choices. Look at the whole broad market and don't be as concerned with who owns a property as how many properties are there that might be suitable for your needs, which property best meets your needs. Well, I hope that kind of information is helpful to you. I'm Niel Thomas with Coldwell Banker Best Properties. This has been a Real Estate Short Take.